Yo everyone, UFC 311 Makhachev vs Tsarukyan 2 takes place this weekend, and I'm going to be running you through the entire card, my full predictions and breakdown for every fight. I'm going to start with the prelims, I'm going to end with the main event. Timestamps will be in the description and the comment section below if you want to skip to any fight in particular, and I just want to say that I'm hoping to go better on this card than last week's card, and I really do believe we should go better since a lot of these fights seem to have clear winners, at least in my opinion. So there will have to be a lot of crazy upsets on this card for it to go really bad. That's all I'm saying. I also want to say thank you for all the engagement on the polls recently. I do appreciate it a lot. Please keep voting on those polls. It means a lot to me. To start us off, the first fight of the card is Tagir Ulanbekov versus Clayton Carpenter. This card is really stacked. Great fight to start us off with here. Both guys are great prospects in the flyweight division, and honestly, it's going to be sad for one of them to have to go home the loser this weekend, but that is the sport that we love. So to talk about this matchup, Tagir is going to go into this fight the taller, the rangier, and in my opinion, the more well-rounded striker and submission grappler of the two in this fight. I do think that this fight is close, however, because Clayton Carpenter is undefeated and he's no slouch by any means. He's got a good grappling game and he's a decent striker as well. But I ask myself a couple of things, like who has the most finishing potential in this fight, and could I see either guy winning a decision? And the answer to those questions is that I could see both guys winning a decision here, but I think that Tagir is the more likely to win a decision, and it's because of his defensive grappling, his good range management, and overall his striking game is just better in my opinion. So like I said, both guys could win a decision, but Tagir is the more likely to win a decision. But could I see either guy finishing one another? I could see Tagir Ulanbekov getting a TKO win or a submission win in this fight, a sub being the more likely option. But for Clayton Carpenter, I could honestly only see him potentially getting a KO win here versus Ulanbekov, but it is a low chance. I don't see him submitting Ulanbekov at all in this fight, and I think a lot of Clayton Carpenter's game revolves around wrestling and getting in close with opponents, and I just don't see him being able to control someone like Ulanbekov or finish him in those exchanges. Even Ulanbekov's only loss in the UFC was a pretty close fight, and that was the fight with Tim Elliott, and Tim Elliott cheated so much in that fight. It was a really annoying fight to watch. A point should have been deducted in that fight. That fight probably should have been a draw. But to stop me from rambling, I'm going to go with Tagir Ulanbekov because I think he's the more well-rounded fighter, especially when it comes to jumping on submission opportunities. And I think he's just pretty fluid, pretty precise in his striking at range as well. So I think it'll be a close fight and a tricky one for Clayton Carpenter. Tagir is the pick. Moving on to Ricky Turcios versus Benardo Sopaj. Now, I think this is the second or third time I've covered this exact same matchup, and this fight has been rescheduled a couple of times now, and it's finally happening. So if you guys haven't seen my prior explanations on this fight, I'm just gonna say that I picked Benardo Sopaj to win this one, and I do think he's a decent talent for his age. I also think that Ricky Turcios will struggle in this fight because Benardo Sopaj is the more dangerous fighter in almost every avenue of the fight game in comparison to Ricky Turcios, and he is overall the more technical fighter in both the grappling and stand-up games, so more so in the grappling department. But yeah, Benardo Sopaj is going to be in my confident picks list, and I do believe he will have a dominant performance against Ricky Turcios this weekend, and I am keen to watch his comeback after the brutal KO loss he received from Vinicius Oliveira. So Sopaj is the pick. Moving on to Rinya Nakamura versus Muin Gafurov. Rinya Nakamura is another guy you want to look out for. Extremely dangerous, extremely technical, and someone I believe will win their next fight. So I will be putting him in the confident picks list, and I do believe he beats Muin Gafurov. I just don't like how Muin Gafurov comes into range. I feel like he leaves himself super open, and I think there is a bigger chance that he gets KO'd in this fight than vice versa. I also don't see Gafurov being able to work any sort of grappling in this fight with Rinya Nakamura's grappling advantage, so I think it'll most likely be a stand-up fight unless Rinya dominates with his own grappling. So pretty quick pick, but I do believe it's a slight mismatch, and I agree with the odds. So moving on to Carol Rosa versus Ailin Perez. Now this is a super tricky one, and definitely do think that these are good odds to jump on an Ailin Perez upset victory here. I personally believe this fight should be a lot closer to a 50-50, and I think that both fighters have their clear way of winning this fight. It's a classic striker versus grappler matchup here. Either Carol Perez keeps this on the feet and wins because of her massive stand-up game advantage, or Ailin Perez consistently takes her down and scores massively with her wrestling and grappling in this fight to get the win. So I'm going to take this underdog odds because the odds are just pretty good, I'll be honest, and I'm going to take Ailin Perez to get this win. If no one watched Norma Dumont versus Karol Rosa, which was a fight not too long ago in Karol Rosa's career, she pretty much just got smothered against the cage and lost a decision. Pretty much just got the full Neil Magny treatment, if you know what I'm talking about. So I'm not going to lie to you guys. That really puts me off seeing, because I know Ailin Perez is a lot more technical in terms of her grappling, her throws, her overall ability to reverse and change positions when she is working towards something whilst holding on to her opponent than someone like a Norma Dumont, in my opinion. So I hate seeing the Norma Dumont fight, because if I didn't see that, I probably would have edged this one to Karol Rosa here, because she's just extremely fluid and technical as a striker for a WMMA fighter, in my opinion. But to cut myself off, Ailin Perez is the pick. I'll be sad if Rosa just stuffs every takedown and just puts a beat down on her, but I'm taking the underdog in this matchup. Moving on to Zachary Reese versus Azamat Bekoev. So this was a last-minute replacement. Zachary Reese was meant to fight Cedricus Dumas, I believe, but that fight got cancelled, and now he's a moderate underdog against a UFC debutante in Azamat Bekoev. So I've watched a bit of fight tape on Bekoev, and I actually think I'm going to go for a second underdog of the card in a row and pick Zachary Reese to win this fight. And I could see him getting a finish here as well, but I'm just going to say that he wins this one for now. I just think Bekoev's stand-up is not on par with UFC level competition, and I actually think that Zachary Reese is a lot more technical and dangerous in the stand-up than I initially gave him credit for. I think that Bekoev will look to take Zachary Reese to the ground constantly in this fight, and Reese himself also likes throwing up submissions from his back and is quite decent on the ground. Just seems like a decent matchup for Zachary Reese. Crazy it's not even money, honestly. So I'm going to take those underdog odds and go with Zachary Reese here to get the upset. Moving on to Grant Dawson versus Carlos Diego Ferreira. I almost am thinking of taking a third underdog in a row. I'm going to run through this real quick. Okay, I'll run you guys through this. Grant Dawson is still a prospect that I like. Very solid grappling game, strong wrestler that can out-wrestle lesser wrestlers in the division, but doesn't have the most solid striking game around. Diego Ferreira is the more solid striker and has most recently knocked out Michael Johnson and Mateus Rebecki, which is very, very impressive. But he doesn't have the same grappling game of Grant Dawson, and his BJJ is quite good, and his ability to scramble out of bad positions does make this fight a bit more unpredictable. But it looks like I will be picking the favorite in Grant Dawson here. I just think that in picking Grant Dawson, he'll most likely win a close decision with his grappling. I think it's good enough to take Carlos Diego Ferreira down and defend against a lot of submissions. I think he'll be able to control Carlos Diego Ferreira, but like I said, I do think that the odds should be a bit closer because it just seems like a bad matchup for Grant Dawson. So Grant Dawson is the pick. Moving on to Bogdan Guskov versus Billy Elekana. So this is another late replacement for Johnny Walker, who should have been versing Bogdan here. I'm just going to go with Bogdan Guskov here, guys. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm just going to be straight up. It's most likely because I've seen him tested with UFC caliber guys, and he's quite solid. And for Billy Elekana, I just haven't seen him tested yet. He actually does look quite solid though. In his striking, he's quite good, looked pretty slick and fast in the fights that I watched him in, but having a fight against Bogdan Guskov in your UFC debut is pretty hard in my opinion, and I just can't favor a debuter unless they show me something really special. So Bogdan Guskov is the pick. I'm going to move on to the next fight of the card, which is Jailton Almeida versus Serghei Spivac. And I think this fight is a pretty clear pick for Jailton Almeida here. And I'm going to put it in my confident picks list as well. I just don't like how he reacted to the takedown attempts of Tybura when Spivac first versed him in their first fight. I'm not talking about the rematch. I'm talking about the first fight. So Tybura in that fight was just super slow on every entry, and he was just still able to secure the takedowns on Spivac. Someone as explosive as Jailton Almeida, I feel, is definitely going to be able to secure those takedowns. I think this is going to be a dominating fight on the ground for Jailton Almeida. I'll be surprised if anything but happens. You know, Spivac could get a random submission, but I just don't think it's the most likely scenario. So Spivac is pretty solid on the ground. He did submit Tybura in that rematch. I just don't think will deal well with Jailton's explosiveness and speed. So that's the pick. Moving on to Payton Talbott versus Raoni Barcelos. Now, I don't think I will ever in a million years agree with a minus 1400 favorite against another human being. Although I say that, I do think that Payton Talbott will win this fight, and I do think he will win by knockout as well. Certain fighters have a calmness to them, have a fluidity to themselves in the octagon, and Payton Talbott is that guy. Extremely talented young man. I believe he will get the finish, and he should get someone higher rated soon. It's a quick pick, added to the confident picks list. Moving on to the main card, we're going to go with Kevin Holland versus Reiner de Ridder, and I will be picking Kevin Holland in this matchup. And I'm just going to flat out go and say it for you guys. I just don't think that Reiner de Ridder is that good. Honestly, I definitely think that the level of competition at many other promotions does not live up to the UFC's level. And I can see Kevin Holland winning this fight pretty easily unless he somehow just gets dominated in the grappling by Reiner de Ridder, which I do not see happening. I think that Kevin Holland's solid on the ground for the most part. He's quite solid in scrambling, and he only has lost to grapplers that have some sort of explosiveness or raw power advantage. They get the takedown with that raw power advantage, like a Roman Dolidze or a Khamzat Chimaev. And I don't compare Reiner de Ridder to someone like Khamzat Chimaev. I definitely don't see him ragdolling Kevin Holland in the way that Khamzat did. And Kevin Holland 100% has the stand-up advantage in this matchup. Reiner de Ridder was getting rocked by Gerald Meerschaert, man. I think Kevin Holland KO, TKO, finishes Reiner de Ridder in this fight, or gets a very, very dominant decision win. That's my pick. We're moving on to Beneil Dariush versus Renato Moicano. And if this was a Beneil Dariush from like 2 fights ago, I'd be picking him in a heartbeat because of his ability on the ground. His scrambles, they're very good. But Moicano just has the momentum now, and crazy momentum going into this fight. Looking fantastic, dominating with his grappling. Very impressive performance against a Benoit Saint-Denis. And Beneil, like I mentioned, has had a bad outing in his last 2 fights. He lost 2 times by brutal knockout. Granted, they were to 2 of the greatest fighters in the division currently, which is Arman Tsarukyan and Charles Oliveira. But the result is still the same. I can see this fight being decently close. Probably a little bit boring as well, and I think it might stay on the feet with Moicano edging out a decision. I think that Moicano's stand-up has improved quite a bit, and I think he might actually slightly edge out Beneil's stand-up game at this point. So that's what I'm basing this pick on, the stand-up game. It's a close fight, going with Renato Moicano here. I'm moving on to Jiří Procházka versus Jamal Hill. Now, I can almost guarantee you guys one thing from this fight. One of these fighters will be going to sleep on the weekend. I really don't see this fight going the distance, and it's because both fighters are so aggressive. They're stand-up fighters predominantly, and they have knockout power to spare. I worry for Jiří Procházka, man. He is one of my favorite fighters in the UFC, and not to say I hate Jamal Hill or anything. I actually do like him, but I just really like Jiří. And this is a super dangerous fight for him because Jamal Hill has some great lead hooks in his game and Jiří hasn't got the best defense. I do think, though, that Jiří Procházka will be the more explosive fighter. I also think that Hill also has his guard quite low at times as well, which leaves him open to power blows, especially from the left side, which is probably why Ferreira was able to catch him with his left hook. The thing is, if this fight goes into the later rounds, I think that Jamal Hill's technique is a lot more grounded and a lot more solid, and that would probably lead him to getting a later rounds finish when Jiří starts to slow down. So I would favor Jamal Hill in the later rounds if it does go there, but I see this fight only lasting 1 to 2 rounds maximum. And I really think that you have to have otherworldly power to knock out a Jiří Procházka at this point. Maybe his chin's completely gone after his last loss, but we won't know until we see on the weekend. But I think both guys will land big shots, and I think that Jiří's chin will hold up, and he will be the last one standing at the end of the fight. This is what I hope, or at least I'm trying to manifest, you know, like I manifested this, you know, my Israel Adesanya impression there. I'm just going to cry if Jiří gets KO'd here. I'm going to move on to the co-main event of the evening, Merab Dvalishvili versus Umar Nurmagomedov. Alrighty, guys. We know one thing from all of Merab's fights in the past, and that is he struggles to work in the grappling game apart from getting the initial takedown itself. He has been absolutely amazing and relentless when working for takedowns. His gas tank is literally endless, and against a lot of opponents, this is a hard mountain to climb. But I believe that Umar Nurmagomedov is almost designed to defeat a fighter like Merab. And it's because Umar has an amazing grappling game himself. He can work on his back takes and submissions in this fight, and he by far has the overwhelming stand-up advantage in this fight. Umar is amazing with his striking, especially when most people look at him like a grappler and someone who will just try to take you down. He really has shown in his fights within the UFC that he has the ability to put you out on the feet and absolutely dominate you on the feet as well, depending on who he is versing. So, fantastic performance against Cody Sandhagen, just something I cannot forget. Very dominant and technical. Styles make fights, guys, and just hard to see Merab being able to deal with Umar in this one. You'd have to imagine Merab being able to grind out Umar with like 100 takedowns in this fight and being able to secure a lot of them as well. Really is hard to imagine. Doesn't seem like the most likely scenario. And Umar Nurmagomedov will most likely win this fight, guys, and we will have an Anu for a bantamweight champion this weekend. I like Merab, but that's probably going to happen. Now on to the main event and the last fight of the card. Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan 2. Now before I state who I picked for this fight, let's see who you, the subscribers and followers of this channel, picked to win this fight. Let's take a look together. You guys ended up picking Islam Makhachev to defeat Arman Tsarukyan this weekend at UFC 311. And let me say this, I completely agree with you. But something I don't agree with is the fact that Islam is a minus 400 favorite against Arman. I personally believe this is quite a close pick, and I'd understand Islam being a 2-1 favorite going into this one, but the odds makers probably saw that they fought once in the past and that Arman lost the first time, but they forget that Arman was super young, and I believe it was on short notice as well, so this fight is completely different in many ways. But to get back on track, Islam will be the more well-rounded striker in this fight. He's got great knees in the clinch, he's got great kicks, great boxing, decent power, whilst Arman really only has some decent boxing in his arsenal. So he's not as well-rounded as someone like Islam in the stand-up, but Arman has really shown that he can be extremely technical in the grappling, extremely flexible, and be able to out-scramble others in some really bad situations in the grappling, like we saw in his match against Charles Oliveira. I think that this fight will most likely be a close fight. I think this will probably go to decision, and I think that Islam will be one step ahead in a lot of the exchanges and be able to edge out decision in this one. That's what I'm imagining, and that's what I think the most likely scenario will be. Very similar to the first fight, although they have both greatly improved. So that's my predictions for the main event, and that's all for my predictions for UFC 311 Makhachev versus Tsarukyan. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the breakdown and want to see more MMA related content. Thanks for watching, guys, and see you guys next time.